In a world where love is often measured by appearances, there lived a princess who had everything except the one thing she desperately wanted: someone who could look past her size and see the beauty of her dancing soul. But sometimes, the greatest treasures come disguised in the most unexpected packages, and the most valuable lessons are learned through our deepest regrets. In the heart of a bustling village lived Princess Elle, the firstborn daughter of the revered King Cheddar. While her three younger sisters had found their life partners and settled into marital bliss, Elle remained alone, her path to marriage blocked by cruel whispers and societal judgments about her size. The villagers, never once to hold their tongues, would gather in small groups to exchange their poisonous gossip. Did you hear, they would whisper, their words carrying on the wind? They need 3 wrappers just to go around her waist. Others would add their own embellishments. I heard she can finish a whole goat in one sitting. These stories grew and twisted like vines, wrapping around Elle's reputation and strangling her chances at finding love. King Cheddar and his wife watched their daughter's isolation with heavy hearts. They had tried everything within their power: arranged meetings, royal introductions, even sending word to distant kingdoms. But each potential suitor would arrive full of hope, only to leave with poorly concealed disappointment and hasty excuses. Yet in this world of rejection and mockery, Elle had found one pure joy: dancing. When the moon climbed high and the village settled into silence, she would slip away to secluded corners of the palace grounds. There, hidden from judgmental eyes, her body would move with a grace that defied expectations. Her feet would trace patterns in the dust, her arms would weave stories in the air, and for those precious moments she would forget the weight of her troubles. During festivals, when the entire village erupted in celebration, Elle would find herself a quiet spot just close enough to hear the drums. From these hidden vantage points she would let the rhythm take hold, her body swaying and turning with a freedom she never felt in the daylight. The music would seep into her bones, and her heart would soar with each beat of the distant drums. But even these moments of joy were tinged with sadness. Elle had long since accepted that marriage might never be her destiny. She had watched too many men turn away, seen too many faces twist with barely concealed disgust. Who would want me, she would ask herself in the quiet hours of the night. Who could see past this body to love the person within? Her parents' continued attempts at matchmaking only served to deepen her resignation. Each new introduction felt like another wound, each polite rejection another scar. Yet they persisted, driven by love and concern for their firstborn daughter, even as their hopes grew dimmer with each passing season. In the end, Elle found herself trapped between the weight of societal expectations and the reality of her situation, finding solace only in those precious moments when she could dance her troubles away, hidden from the world that seemed determined to judge her. The annual festival between the 4 neighboring villages brought its usual excitement, filling the air with the scent of celebration and possibility. While others prepared their finest clothes and practiced their performances, Princess Elle slipped away to her secret dancing spot, content to experience the joy of the festival from afar. As the music from the festival square drifted through the air, Elle began to dance, her movements flowing naturally with the distant rhythms. Lost in her own world, she barely noticed when a new drum beat began to weave through the festival music, growing louder and more distinct. It wasn't until the festival music stopped completely that she realized the drumming continued, coming from right behind her. Turning in surprise, she found herself face to face with a man she had never seen before, his hand still resting on his drum, a warm smile lighting up his face. When she tried to flee, embarrassed at being discovered, he called out to her. "Why did you stop dancing?" His voice carried no mockery, only genuine curiosity and warmth. Despite her initial suspicion, there was something disarming about the stranger who introduced himself as Aaron. His simple attire marked him as a visitor from another village, and his eyes held no judgment as they looked at her. When he began to play his drum again, the rhythm seemed to speak directly to her soul, inviting her to dance without words. Days turned into weeks, and their secret meetings became a cherished ritual. Each evening, as the sun began its descent, Elle would make her way to their special spot, where Aaron always waited with his drum. He would play, and she would dance, their artistic connection growing stronger with each passing day. Between dances, they would talk for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter. Aaron saw beyond Elle's size to the graceful dancer within, appreciating her joy in movement and her gentle spirit. He delighted in composing new rhythms just for her, watching how she interpreted each beat with her unique style. In his presence, Ego felt seen for who she truly was, not just as the overweight princess who couldn't find a husband. Their connection deepened naturally, like a river finding its course. Aaron's drumming became more passionate and Ego's dancing more expressive, their artistic dialogue telling the story of their growing feelings. Neither spoke of love directly, but it was there in every beat of the drum, every step of the dance. Then came the evening when Aaron finally gave voice to what had been building between them. As the last notes of his drumming faded into the twilight, he set aside his instrument and took Ego's hands in his. With simple, honest words, he expressed his desire to make their connection official, to come with his people on the next market day and ask for her hand in marriage. For the first time in her life, Ego felt truly accepted and loved. The prospect of marriage, which had once seemed like an impossible dream, now stood before her as real as the man holding her hands, his eyes full of promise and genuine affection. Just as Ego's life seemed to be blooming with newfound happiness, darkness crept across the 4 villages like a heavy storm cloud. News spread faster than the wind about a mysterious airborne disease that had begun claiming victims in neighboring communities. What started as distant whispers soon became a terrifying reality as more and more people fell ill. The village chiefs acted swiftly, closing their borders to prevent further spread of the disease. Roads that once buzzed with traders and travelers now stood empty, guarded by stern-faced warriors who turned away even their own kinsmen. Families were separated, lovers kept apart, and the vibrant flow of life between the villages came to an abrupt halt. For Ego, this meant more than just isolation, it meant separation from Aaron. Their special meeting place, once filled with the joyful sounds of drums and dancing, fell silent. Each sunset that passed without his presence felt like a small death, a reminder of the happiness that had been snatched away, just as she had found it. Then, despite all precautions, the disease found its way into Ego's home. It started with a slight fever that she tried to ignore, attributing it to her longing for Aaron. But soon, the fever grew into a raging fire that consumed her from within. Her normally healthy appetite vanished completely, replaced by waves of nausea that made even the thought of food unbearable. The days blurred into weeks as Ego fought for her life. The palace healers worked tirelessly, trying every remedy they knew. Her mother spent sleepless nights by her bedside, wiping her brow and praying to the ancestors for intervention. Even her sisters, usually so full of playful teasing, now watched their elder sisters to struggle with genuine fear in their eyes. The disease proved to be a merciless opponent. Where once Ego had struggled to resist extra portions at meals, now she could barely force down a few mouthfuls of soup. Her body, which had carried its extra weight for so long, began to shed it rapidly. The finest royal robes hung loose on her frame, and her face, once round and full, started showing angles and contours never seen before. For 3 long months, Ego danced between life and death, her body becoming a battlefield where the disease waged its war. The palace corridors, usually filled with the bustle of royal life, fell quiet except for the whispered prayers and the soft footsteps of healers coming and going from her chambers. When a local herbalist finally discovered a cure, Ego was among the first to receive it. As her strength gradually returned, she began to notice the dramatic changes in her body. The illness had transformed her physically, leaving her almost unrecognizable to herself. The irony wasn't lost on her what countless diets and royal physicians had failed to achieve, this deadly disease had accomplished in mere months. Yet as she stood before her mirror studying her new reflection, a shadow of worry crossed her mind. Would Aaron recognize her when they finally met again? Would he still want her, now that she looked so different from the woman he had fallen in love with? As Ego's strength returned, her transformation became the talk of the village. Where once there were whispers of mockery, now there were murmurs of admiration. The princess who had been overlooked for so long suddenly found herself at the center of attention, with wealthy suitors appearing at the palace gates daily, each hoping to catch her eye. The attention went straight to Ego's head like sweet wine. She began to forget the lonely days when only her secret dancing brought her joy. Most tragically, she forgot about Aaron, the drummer who had loved her when no one else would look her way. When the borders finally reopened and she met him at their special place, Her heart had hardened with pride. My Princess Aaron had greeted her with his familiar warm smile. I missed your beautiful smile, but Igbo merely looked down her nose at him, her newly defined features twisted in disdain. When he began to play the drum, hoping to recreate their magical moments, she cut him off sharply. Stop that noise, Mr. Drummer, she sneered. The old term of endearment now turned into an insult. I am not interested in marrying someone of your status anymore. She turned on her heel, leaving behind a bewildered Aaron and the echoes of their once beautiful connection. Drunk on her new popularity, Igbo hatched a grand plan. She would host a wrestling competition where the strongest and most eligible bachelors would compete for her hand in marriage. The announcement spread through all 4 villages, attracting warriors, wealthy traders, and men of noble birth. Each hoped to win the now beautiful princess who had caught everyone's eye. To prepare for her grand moment, Igbo sequestered herself in the palace for 4 months, demanding the finest beauty treatments. But in her vanity, she failed to recognize a crucial truth: her weight loss had been the result of illness, not any lasting change in her habits. As she continued to indulge in the large portions she had always enjoyed, her body began to respond predictably. Day by day, meal by meal, the weight crept back. At first she ignored the tightening of her clothes, convinced that the palace seamstresses were making mistakes. But as the weeks passed, she could no longer deny what was happening. Her face rounded again, her arms softened, and her figure returned to its former fullness. Panic set in as the day of the competition approached. Igbo begged her father to cancel the event, but the king refused, insisting that she would find a suitor regardless of her size. But deep in her heart she knew the truth: she had squandered something precious in her moment of pride. The memory of Aaron's hurt expression haunted her dreams, and the drum beats that once brought her such joy now echoed like accusations in her mind. As she prepared to face her suitors, Igbo realized too late that true love sees beyond the surface, and she had rejected the one person who had seen her real beauty all along. The day of the wrestling competition dawned bright and clear, but Igbo's heart was heavy with dread. As she made her way to the village square, the excited chatter of the gathered crowd fell into stunned silence. The suitors, who had traveled from far and wide with dreams of winning a slim princess, stared in disbelief at the figure before them. One by one, they began to leave. Some made polite excuses, others didn't bother hiding their disappointment. Warriors who had boasted of their strength suddenly remembered urgent matters elsewhere. Traders who had brought rich gifts quietly packed them away. The grand competition that was meant to be Igbo's triumph became her greatest humiliation. As she stood there, fighting back tears, a familiar figure caught her eye. There was Aaron, but not as she had known him. Gone were the simple clothes of a drummer. Instead, he stood resplendent in royal attire, his bearing unmistakably noble. A servant approached him, bowing deeply. "My prince," the servant said, "your father is ready to leave now." The truth hit Igbo like a bolt of lightning. Aaron was no common drummer. He was a prince of one of the 4 villages. He had disguised himself during festivals to play music among the common people, wanting to be loved for himself rather than his title. And she, in her foolish pride, had dismissed him as beneath her when she was the one who had failed to see beyond appearances. Their eyes met across the emptying square. In his gaze, Igbo saw not judgment or mockery, but a lingering sadness for what might have been. She wanted to run to him, to apologize, to explain, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. The moment stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm, filled with all the words they would never say. Then Aaron turned away, and with his departure went Igbo's last chance at true happiness. The drumbeats that had once brought them together now faded into nothing more than bitter memories. She had learned too late that love, real love, sees with the heart rather than the eyes. Years passed and Igbo's options dwindled. Eventually she accepted a proposal from an elderly chief who already had 9 wives. It was not the love match she had dreamed of, nor the grand alliance her position as first princess might have warranted. Instead, it was a marriage of convenience, a final refuge for a princess who had let pride blind her to true love. In the quiet hours of night, Igbo would sometimes hear distant drumbeats from village festivals. In those moments she would remember the joy she once found in dancing to Aaron's rhythms, the love that had been freely offered when she was at her lowest. But these were only memories now, bitter reminders of how she had thrown away a precious gift in a moment of vanity. Her story became a cautionary tale in the village, whispered around fires as a reminder that true love's worth lies not in appearances or status, but in the heart that loves unconditionally through all seasons of life.